started the recording. So for those of you tuning into the recording, this is a session called Reading Your Application, Transcripts, and Test Score Like an Admission Officer. And the goal of this session really is, as we'll see on the agenda slide that Tillie can walk you through, is to really help unpack this behind the scenes lens and really get a sense for, okay, removing yourself and kind of how you're coming to this process as a parent, as a student, and really trying to think like the person who's reading your actual application. Because it's difficult for you to actually do that if you've never worked in that job and you haven't read 60 plus applications per day for months of the year. That really helps you gain that insight. But we're going to try to squeeze out as much of those years of experience that we have and present that to you all in the next 50 or so minutes. So glad you're here. One quick housekeeping item. I know Tillie had mentioned it before. We do have a Q&A box as part of the Zoom webinar that we'd love for you to direct your questions during the session to. Tillie and myself will be keeping an eye out on that. But also the chat should be available as well if you need to get in touch with us as panelists and with Ray, our wonderful moderator, if you're having any technical related issues.
Okay, so let's talk agenda, folks. We'll keep this brief because we want to get into the real content, but we are gonna talk a lot about course rigor and the transcript, right? Understanding kind of these two critical pieces of the application. What do the grades really signal? What are the specific offerings? And then how does the school profile play a role when admission officers are looking at the application as a whole, evaluating you in your context? Test optional. We're in this seemingly ever-shifting world of testing, so we do want to give you some updated information and concrete tips in terms of how to approach the world of test optional decisions. And then finally, how do you navigate? What are some strategies for addressing dips, hiccups, gaps, issues, or ways that you've really grown throughout that application? So we will give you a couple insights there, but I'm going to hand it off to Tom.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tillie. Okay, so before we actually dive into, reading your transcript and your test score with that admission officer lens, it's really helpful to get a sense for who these people are reading your application. Because sometimes it can be a very ambiguous, right? And there's, I think about Legally Blonde, which all of you Gen Z/Gen Alpha students listening to this are like, what? But great movie featuring Reese Witherspoon. And there's scenes in the beginning of the movie about her admission video and application to Harvard. It's very funny. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. But all the men sitting around the table are like tweed jackets, gray hair, beards, the pipes, the whole 9 yards. And that is a very kind of vintage Hollywood inaccuracy, as with many things in this world that are portrayed in media that aren't necessarily the reality. So the reality is that most admission officers are normal people, right? They're oftentimes tend to be younger than people think. So in terms of relatability in your application and ability to like be a human being in your writing, usually more of a green light than a really stiff, very overly, I'd say, professional presentation with every single essay. Yes, you want to take it seriously, and there's moments for lightness and fun. But we're focusing less on the written parts of the application today and more on your academic background and how admission officers contextualize that. And I use that word very intentionally, contextualize, because if you get one tip out of this webinar, it's that context is everything when it comes to college admissions, especially when it comes to your academic evaluation, right? So on that note, admission officers typically at most, especially selective schools, the way that they divide up their application reading, because they have applications coming in from all over the world, most admission officers are assigned a particular geographic territory that they're responsible for managing. So when I worked in admissions at Pomona, for example, I was responsible for Pacific Northwest states. So Washington State, Oregon, I had certain counties in California that I read applications for. I also read for Northern New England, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. So I had some amazing territories, I have to say. And my job was to get to know the schools, if there are particular programs, for example, community college partnerships that certain states have, like Washington had this program called Running Start. So it'd be frequent for students from Washington State high schools to have community college classes through that particular program. That's an example of how someone in admissions is really trying to work to understand the state and the local area that you're coming from, and not just the state or region more broadly, or the country more broadly if you're an international student, but the actual course offerings and GPA scale, and et cetera, of your individual high school, which is helped contextualized to the admission officer by a document called the school profile, as well as applicant history from previous applicants over the years from your school. They're also reading applications very, very quickly. Really kind of making sure that your academic story makes sense from the beginning is something that, ideally your school profile and your transcript are communicating that pretty effectively. They usually tend to do that without any work on your own end because the transcripts is put together by your high school. You don't actually have to do much with that, but that's usually the very first thing that they're going to before reading the rest of your application materials and essays and recommendations. It's almost always academics first because the whole idea is that they want to make sure that you are an academically viable candidate before seriously considering the other components. You can think about it as the foot in the door in the admission process. And yes, the transcript and the academic piece of your evaluation is analyzing your past performance, especially when it comes to academics. But the idea is that they're trying to understand your future potential, right? And so the transcript that you're sending in tells a story of how academically prepared you are to handle the rigors of that particular institution. And so the transcript is telling that kind of past piece, of course, but the rest of the application is for you to communicate your future aspirations and goals based on what you've equipped yourself with from your academic and personal background, your extracurricular background as a high school student. So in terms of evaluating course rigor, two important questions that I want to equip you with, and I want you to think about this as you're thinking about how your academic story is being communicated to colleges. Because generally, when an admission officer gets to your application, they're asking themselves, what was available to this student based on their individual high school? And what did the student leave on the table? As in, what did they not take advantage of? What did they opt out of that was available to them? And they're usually making a note about those course choices on your application notes in their reader form. So say you go to a high school where, for example, there are no AP classes offered. There's many, many high schools that are like that. Some of them are high schools in rural areas, right, where there's just not a lot of students who are going to four-year colleges. Maybe there's not as many teachers or resources to teach AP classes. The admission officer would understand that, and they would know that you, as an applicant, are doing the best with what you have available to you. You may also be attending another school that doesn't have AP classes like Phillips Exeter, which is the opposite end of the spectrum. It is a private high school with an advanced curriculum that the teachers and the admin at Phillips Exeter design themselves. So it's not the standard advanced placement curriculum or a standardized IB, International Baccalaureate curriculum. And so students at Phillips Exeter are not at a disadvantage because they don't have AP classes. The admission officer knows based on the school profile and applicant history that that's not available to the student. So what was available? Non-AP advanced classes that the students had choices to take. And then based on those course offerings that the school is letting the admission office know about, they're asking themselves when they're reading the transcript, okay, what did they take advantage of? And then what are maybe some course choices that they did not take advantage of? For many applicants that are successful academic applicants to highly selective schools, the answer to that second question is not a whole lot, right? Most of the students who are being seen as academically viable to especially these really highly selective schools are generally students who took advantage of the advanced course offerings, whatever they may be, even as limited as they are, to the best of their abilities. And in particular, a prioritization of solid academic courses are what we call them, also known as core subjects, right? So this is just a chart to help you get a sense of if you were to look at some of the most, selective schools that are out there, when you look at their websites in terms of recommended coursework, these are a few of the reported numbers from some of these schools. So Tillie, I don't know if this was your slide or if this was me. I think it might have been me. But
It's
anyway,
still you.
Okay, still me. Yeah, I think this is my last one. Yeah.
You're good to go.
So what you notice here is that most of the schools here are encouraging 4 years of these various subjects. And again, this is just a small snapshot of a few schools and their reported recommended coursework on their website and on their common data sets. And what I want to reiterate, though, is that you may be seeing this and being like, oh, MIT says only 2 years of history or only 2 years of language. I think this is communicating like the minimum that they would expect. I would say to be a successful academic candidate, you want to be close to 4 in all 5 of these columns, or yes, all 5 of these columns. Some of you maybe, for example, you chose to opt out of taking 4 years of a language course. Maybe you reached the third level of Spanish, and then you ended there because in your state or in your high school, that's all you needed to graduate. That generally, some of these moves are going to be okay, but I just want to let you know, especially as you may be finalizing or thinking about your courses for next year, that generally the closer you can get to 4 in all of these subject areas, the better off you will be across the board, no matter what your college list looks like. And it's really hard for me to give like universal advice to all of you tuning in, but this is one of the few ones that I'm like, if you take away, again, first thing is context is everything. Second thing is try to get to close to 4 full years of these 5 subject areas as you can. And ideally also, especially if you're aiming for selective schools, you are advancing in course rigor as your high school career progressed. So I wouldn't want to personally be an applicant that's applying to all these schools with less than 4 years of all these categories and subjects. If you do end up doing that and you replace them with a solid academic course, that's generally okay. So for example, say senior year, you decide you want to take an additional science class, so 2 science classes, having you graduate with 5 instead of a 4th year of language. Generally, that's going to be okay. But the safest and broadest route that is accepted and kind of a green light, a green flag for the vast majority of colleges is going to be this course plan that we're describing.
Okay, I'm going to pause frantically answering your excellent questions.
I will take over.
Yes. Now Tom will take over to talk about, we're terming it the secret life of your transcript, but Tom was talking about this earlier, everybody, which is to say that your transcript and your grades really do tell a story, right? There's so much beyond just those letters or numbers, and admission officers are trying to read between the lines. Sometimes you can give them a lot of help and give them extra context for ebbs and flows, and we'll get into that. But I want to give you a general sense for how we are viewing each grade as we go through. So 9th grade, there is some leeway given, right? We know you're transitioning to high school. It can be a big transition for some. And a rough start doesn't define you, but it is still on the record. And I'll say, too, having spent a lot of time in California working with the UCs, right? Yes, they're not calculating your 9th grade grades into their UC GPA, but they still see those grades and they see the courses you've chosen. And you have to keep in mind that for highly selective institutions, having a rough 9th grade can certainly have an impact, and we'll get into that in a little bit. 10th grade, there's a little bit less forgiveness. The assumption is that you are getting more comfortable with the rigors of high school, and you're expected to kind of find your footing, start to challenge yourself in the areas where you have particular interests. And then 11th grade, that's the most important year, everybody. It's recent, it's the most recent grades that colleges are going to see initially. It's the strongest way to signal your readiness for college, for the rigors, to say, yes, I'm taking this step up. And you're typically given the opportunity to submit mid-year reports. Everybody's going to see those first semester grades from 12th grade. But 12th grade really does matter to everybody. First semester matters. It can be an opportunity to show an upward trend, which is a little bit of insider lingo. And we know senioritis is real, but I will say 2 things. Yes, it's possible, and we've seen colleges rescind offers if grades drop dramatically. We're not talking from an A+ to an A-. It would be like an A to a C, right? That can get flagged and may need to be explained. But the second piece, which to me is like less panic-driven, you want to take the opportunity to be as prepared as possible for the rigors of college. So taking your foot off the brake when it comes to rigor, when it comes to learning as much as you can before you have to be in this brand new, highly rigorous landscape of college is a good idea. Right? You want to be as prepared as possible. So, and I know you've worked really hard for 4 years, but you want to keep pushing yourself in 12th grade. Okay, Tom, will you give me the next slide, please? Alrighty. So here, this is, when I'm talking to my students, I really talk about it as sort of the gates to opening possibility. This is what Tom means when he's talking about, whether we as admission officers sort of stop paying attention if these 2 parts of the equation aren't there. It's grades plus rigor. So let's understand options there. Straight A's with no challenge, right, is not going to look as impressive as B's in rigorous courses, right? We notice when you are avoiding risk and not 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 challenging yourself where appropriate or available. So B's in rigorous courses are generally viewed positively, right? If you take the harder path, it's showing courage intellectually, a capacity for risk, a readiness to stretch yourself, right? Again, the gold standard is A's in rigorous courses. We have this quote here because it's snarky but true, right? For the most selective colleges, everybody, they want you to get A's in the honors AP and IB classes. That's just the deal. That's who you're going to be up against really most competitively. So that would be the gold standard, right? Is having A's. So you can't just have the rigor and not the grades, but that is for a small percentage of schools, right? Generally, a B in AP Chem is going to read very differently than an A in regular Chem, and we know that, right? It's nuanced, and sometimes we'll even see things like, oh, I know that school, nobody gets A's in AP Physics, right? Maybe that might be something you want to include, but we are looking at the whole context. Okay, next slide, please. So which subjects are really getting scrutinized? I'm glad we include this slide because there are so many questions and we can't really answer specific ones now, like is X and Y class considered? But core subjects, what are really going to get scrutinized, or sometimes we call them solids. And as a theater major, I take issue with these, but I'm not the person making these decisions. But English, right, required all 4 years. The AP language and literature look really strong, even if you're a non-humanities major. They like to see that well-roundedness if it is something you can manage. Math, the sort of the gold standard there for the most selective would be aiming for calculus. If you are STEM bound, right, or if you are bound for the most selective colleges, AP Calc AB would be what's expected or the equivalent if you don't have APs in your high school. BC for the most selective programs, and I would argue if you're looking at kind of the top engineering programs or top STEM heavy, multivariable and beyond, right? That's really if you're super STEM. For science, this is the holy trinity of biochem and physics. I think most selective colleges do want to see those three, not just science selectives. And this, I loved anatomy and physiology. I loved taking Envi Sci. They are valuable subjects. That's not what's being said here. We're just kind of telling you what these standards are from most highly selective admissions processes. Social studies, and I had a good question in here, also counts as history, right? So econ, psych, sociology fits into this bucket. There's a little bit more flexibility. We still recommend 4 years, but you have a little bit of wiggle room here, right? So if you're somebody who would absolutely love AP Euro versus someone who's really fascinated with psych and you have those options, that's great, right? And then world language. So most colleges really are going to prefer 4 years. If you're looking at the most selective, we strongly recommend it, but it's not looked at with the same scrutiny. So I don't want anybody in there. I had to tell my student, absolutely, just because you didn't take Latin for a 4th year does not mean you're not getting into college. So we don't speak in those absolutes. It's just not the way this works, fortunately. But stopping at 3 is okay, but not if you replace it with a study hall or a non-core subject. You want to at least be having, if that's the structure of your school, 5 core solids or core subjects by your senior year. And if you drop a world language, then you want to replace that with another core subject that's closer to something of interest to you. Okay, on to you, Tom.
Thank you, Tillie. Just as I'm answering a few questions, I just want to clarify a few things. So some of your questions are very specific about your individual high school transcript and offerings, and we're going to try to answer these as best as we can, but just know that without knowing you, without seeing your transcript, without seeing the full picture, just like these admission officers, it's a little difficult for us to give the most definitive, like, yes, that's a great course choice, but we'll try our best efforts. What I am noticing in several patterns in your questions, though, is it okay if I do blank? Or I'm doing this because of blank. And I want to normalize, and I want to let you know that there are going to be some choices. Maybe remember back to those 2 questions. What does the student have available? What did they leave on the table? What you want to do is if you can think of like, okay, an admission officer might be wondering why I didn't take these courses because they're on my school profile. But I couldn't take it because the teacher was not teaching this year, or because it conflicted with another course, or whatever the reason may be. It's very normal for people to write in their additional information section of their application some of these academic particularities, is what we might call them. So whether it's availability of courses, whether it's intentional choices that you made. So for example, say there was a student who had a question about, she's like, oh, I decided that I wanted to opt out of language my senior year because I wanted to take more courses toward my intended major. That is actually a great thing to even think about communicating in your additional information section. You could have a little heading that says course context, and you can write a few words, a few bullets about, hey, I really wanted to prepare myself for these particular areas. So I made course choices intentionally to build up my skills in this area. And here are some of the things I learned from it. That's going to be really compelling to someone at admissions who's like, gee, like this person has a plan. They had intention behind what they chose. And they're giving me a little bit of a window into why they chose what they did, instead of just having me fill in the blanks or guess without that information being shared, right? So your high school is going to be sharing some information of this from the counselor letter of recommendation and from your transcript and from the school profile, but that's just a sheet of grades and numbers and GPA points and course offerings and things that isn't necessarily telling your story or your decisions. So I want to empower you to think about the written open spaces in your application to fill in those blanks, and not have the person reading your application doing that on their own. Okay, so if you have not seen your school's profile, I just want to let you know that you probably are able to locate a copy by either emailing your school counselor, whoever is helping you out with college applications, or it's oftentimes on your website. So even sometimes just Googling your high school name and then school profile, oftentimes you'll find a PDF of a document that I'm about to show you. And I really recommend asking and looking at this early and ahead of time. So that way, what is being shared with the colleges that you're applying to, right? You know how your school is being positioned and described. And so there's not this kind of ambiguity about, do they know how hard my school is? Or do they know that, we're not allowed to take AP classes until sophomore year? If the school profile is doing what it's supposed to, the answer should be yes to both of those questions. So what does one look like? Let's take a look. So this is a school profile from a high school called Achievement First. It's a network of charter schools, mostly in New England. And this gives you a sense of what I would say is actually a very strong school profile. The reason why I think it's very strong is because the school profile here, let me go ahead and close out this little AI summary. It first off goes and talks about the school population. So you have a total sense of who the school serves in terms of demographics. You have this little kind of summary in the beginning of the profile about where the school is located, the mission of the charter school network that it's a part of. You have some points of pride that they're sharing as well. And they're giving you some really helpful context about, this is what life is like, in Hartford, Connecticut. And there are some academic barriers that the population here faces. So our goal as a school is to really help close that gap. The school, for example, is providing local test scores for the students from this high school and comparing that to schools across the state, schools or scores of students of similar backgrounds that the high school predominantly serves. So every high school profile looks different, and they're designed by school counseling offices and oftentimes by school administration. So this is just one example, but your high school profile is not going to be necessarily formatted the same way, but oftentimes includes similar information. For example, there's a lot of talk right now about grade inflation and how many high schools are, giving a lot more students A's than historically has been the case. So this school profile here is actually noting that the school really tries to actively curve against grade inflation. And you can see that a little bit with the distribution chart of their student performance, right? Not everyone is in this A column. There is a spectrum of student achievement when it comes to grades here. So that's different than some schools where you'd see a chart like this and see, okay, junior grades in some of these core subjects, almost everyone is getting A's. That helps the admission officer reading the school know if you are a top 10% student at this high school, how big of an achievement essentially relative to your peers is that, right? Because it's going to look different from school to school. Being in the top 10% at a school where everyone has a 4.0 and it makes it a little harder for the admission officer to know like who the academic superstars are necessarily. So they're going to spend a little bit more time, not just looking at your GPA, but looking at those course choices, right? Because The 4.0 from the student who opted out of all the AP classes is not the same as the 4.0 from the student who chose that rigorous path, right? This is also just a sense of a lot of times high schools will get or will provide some type of distribution chart to give the admission officer a sense of what does high achievement look like in this local context. They're also giving a breakdown of the course offerings here, right? So you see that they have pre-AP classes, you see the advanced placement offerings that they have in English literature and language, AP research, AP Calc, AP Bio, AP US history, AP World history. So you see very clearly from this course list what was available to the students, right? And you also see, this is very common for many profiles as well, to share a little bit more about outcomes, right? So most school profiles will have a list, for example, of recent colleges that students have been accepted to, or they'll have a statistic around what % of students are going on to four-year colleges or two-year colleges. And that information is used by admission officers to get a sense of the college-going culture that you're surrounded in, right? So for students who are coming from a high school, for example, where there might be a low % of students going on to four-year colleges, that would be seen as a, if you're really at the top of that school group and you're really, applying to selective colleges, that's going to be really taken to note, right? That you are working and aspiring towards a goal that not everyone around you necessarily is working towards, and trying to take intentional steps to make that happen for yourself. So this is all really, really a way that people in admissions make those academic decisions. It's not just, X number of AP classes in a vacuum. And sometimes it's really hard for people to understand that or to believe that. They're like, how can you possibly be looking or rating academically a student the same who has, 5 AP classes when another kid is applying from, for example, there's a network of schools called the basis schools that are known for basically having students starting to take AP classes starting in 9th grade. Many of them are graduating with 15, almost close to 20 AP classes. And that's the norm for basis schools. That's kind of the way that they've set up their model, and really push academic rigor so heavily from day one. Most high schools are not like basis schools, and the bar and expectation is not that everyone coming in is going to have 20 AP classes. For when you're evaluating all the students who are applying from that basis high school, though, you're evaluating them with that achievement level present in your mind and in your scope, but you're not comparing them to the students from the other schools or dinging the students from other schools for not quite having that. So hopefully that makes sense. Tillie, anything coming up in the comments that I should address?
There's still great questions coming in. We're getting a lot that are really hyper specific to your
Yeah.
particular high school, which can be hard for
Yeah.
us to respond to. So I think general questions are a little bit more helpful because if you have really nuanced ones like how many credits in X and Y, it's just too hard for us to answer in this context. So we apologize. We wish we could,
Yeah.
but it's
Hopefully,
yeah, yeah.
hopefully this slide gets at a few of the common ones that we often get, right? A lot of times families are like, well, what GPA is being looked at? My school, they have a academic GPA, they have a comprehensive one, they have a weighted one. Generally, most colleges are going to look at whatever is kind of the highest scale that your school provides. Historically, that's been my experience, is that's the one that they're usually going off of. But no matter kind of what scale they're using, they're being consistent with the scale that they're using. So for example, if you're applying from a high school and 10 applicants are applying to Pomona, I'm not going to be looking at the weighted GPA for Tillie and the unweighted GPA for Tom to ding him down, right? The person evaluating the application is going to be using the same scale, typically whatever your school offers, and typically the highest one that they're reporting out. A lot of colleges will recalculate GPAs. The University of California system is a prime example of this. They're really transparent about how they recalculate GPAs for all students to be on a same standardized flat scale that they use. It doesn't mean that they're not taking into consideration your unique school context or the scale that you're using, but that is something that they do to normalize and streamline their process since they have 100,000 plus applications, right? Some schools will exclude, freshman grades from academic evaluations or GPA calculations, but they still consider your courses that you take. So that's important to note. Sometimes families ask if colleges look at middle school grades because there are certain states or schools where middle school grades or exams and scores will be present on a transcript. I don't know of really any schools that are doing that. I think the UCs will allow for some credit for you for their A through G requirements to come from middle school, but most colleges and most schools are not looking at your middle school grades or performance or extracurriculars. So keep it in the present day. And then class rank. Sometimes we get questions around that because some high schools rank, some high schools don't rank. You're not at a disadvantage no matter which route is out there. Some people say they're like, oh, I feel like class rank is hurting our students. Admission officers are still comparing students no matter what is provided, rank or not rank. They can get a sense, even if you're not ranking students, of who the high achievers are based on GPA, course choices, the distribution charts of grade performance that oftentimes high schools put out in those bands, right? 25% of students have between a 3.9 and a 4.0, or 15% of students have between a 3.6 and a 3.8 for that high school. Always ending with that sentence. So hopefully this gives you more of a sense of, again, that real individual micro level lens. So this was an example that, for the sake of time, I don't quite know if it is going to be practical for us to go into this quite so stringently. But what was that?
Oh, just that we're already at 37. So
I know we
yeah.
time is flying. But this is just to show you, again, an admission officer. This is like a little mini list of what courses are available for this student here on the right. And they're going to make notes about the transcript on the admission file on the notes side when they're going through it. And this is usually one of the very first things that they're doing. So, for example, for this student, you might see it just on the get-go and you're like, I don't know what all these things mean, these acronyms and credits and things, but the admission officer is working to get to know this. That's their job. Excuse me. So one thing you might notice, again, we don't have the 12th grade courses for this student. They're oftentimes listed in the Common App or in progress courses on a transcript, but we just don't have it for this sample. So you can see a very stacked schedule with just a lot of AP classes, right? But it's important to note which ones they're taking. And you can see that they're pretty much all core solid academic courses. And that the student is prioritizing those core solid biology, chemistry, and physics that Tillie mentioned before. You will notice, though, that the student is ending Chinese at Chinese 2, right? So in theory, right, they're not reaching that fourth level of language that many colleges would prefer to see. But if you're an admission officer and you're making a rationale for why the student should be admitted, you would say dropped out of, or stopped at Chinese 2, but clearly did not just coast. And they're replacing that with other core, rigorous, solid academic courses intentionally, right? This next transcript is actually from a student who has a few less courses, or less advanced course offerings. And they have a very clear policy on the left that students are not able to take AP and honors classes. They're in 9th grade. So the student didn't take those. Totally fine. That's the school policy. Not going to hurt her for it. They're also saying on the left that AP and honors courses are given the same GPA weight. Okay, great to know. And the school recommends a maximum of 3 AP or honors courses each year, right? So that's the school policy. That's the school context. So when I'm an admission officer, I'm not going to be going back to the previous student and being like, wow, this student was just sitting around doing nothing. Totally different high school, totally different circumstances. I'm evaluating her based on what's available to her, right? So I'm looking at this transcript, and again, I already did the analysis, so I'm going through this very quickly. But we're seeing, for example, that she took the highest level of biology in her 11th grade, which is great because they don't have AP biology offered anymore. So she took the highest level. That's wonderful. But we're seeing also some things that she left on the table, right? The school has AP English language and AP English literature, and this student chose to take creative writing and detective elective for their senior year English. Those sound like really cool courses, right? So maybe she explained more about it in her additional info section about why she took that. But objectively, me as an admission officer reading this, that's going to be seen as a less rigorous path in English than what was available to the student that she could have taken advantage of. They do have the note that they recommend taking 3 advanced placement or honors courses each year. So she chose, for example, to take AP drawing, Spanish, and calculus. Maybe it would have been more competitive for her to opt out of AP drawing and do an AP English class instead. That would be an example of me making a note of what was available to a student and what did they leave on the table and evaluating them in that light.
Okay, testing everybody. Testing. So we have this shifting testing landscape, but I think I have good news for you, everyone, which is to say that testing, according to NACAC, which is our National Association of College Admissions Counseling, that does extensive research, extremely well regarded in our field, right? It's sort of our beacon professionally. We are seeing that compared to 2018, colleges claiming that testing has considerable importance in the process has dropped from 46% to just 5%, right? This picture is, of course, nuanced. That data is a little bit old. We do think that number is probably a little bit higher just because we've seen now 11 of the top 20 ranked schools return to test required. But overall, that is an enormous decline. I feel that it's a good thing. Has a lot to do with COVID, but also that prompted a lot of research. And of the over 800 schools that went test optional during COVID, which is a lot, only 15 have reverted. And I want everyone to know too that more than 90%, and I'm going to say that again, more than 90% of ranked US colleges and universities will not require applicants to submit testing, right? So we are talking about a very small percentage. Yes, they are the big shiny boys, but that's really important to know, is that this trend is holding, right? We're seeing a little bit more nuance than just the test optional phrasing, and I want you to understand that. So optional is optional, but we're going to talk about that. Required, right? And then there's flexible. And flexible, Yale is a good example of this, where you don't necessarily have to submit your ACT or SAT, but you could submit AP scores or IB scores. So we're seeing schools a little bit more openness and flexibility when it comes to what you are submitting to demonstrate your capacity with regards to testing. And then, of course, there's free and blind testing, free or test blind, like the UCs, where they're not looking at them at all. I want everybody to be aware of fairtest.org. We mention it here, but it's a wonderful resource if you're not familiar. It shows and is very good at updating policies for each school. It'll even show you specifics like testing isn't required if you're out of state, or you can do the AP in lieu of SAT, etc. So it's a great resource for everybody. And the myth that it busts, that I'm so grateful for, is that 75% of merit scholarship colleges, or colleges that offer merit scholarships, do not require a test score, right? So I think there's a lot of language or panic out there about I have to submit test scores to get considered for merit aid. You want to check the schools where you're applying, but the vast majority are not requiring that. But the bottom line is, and we're going to get into this in a little more depth, right? You do want to have a score available, right? If, let's say, by the time you are applying, the policy has changed for your beloved schools, right, that you love most, you do want to have an official SAT or ACT sitting so that you can submit that if you absolutely have to, or those policies change. Okay, Tom, let's go to the next slide. So whether or not to submit, it is the question. Optional is genuinely optional, but this decision deserves real thought, and it is nuanced like many things in this process. Here's a framework for that. And you're going to be using the school website, but there's also what's called the common data set. Every school has to report one. You can literally put in name of school common data set on Google, and it should generate it. They don't have the most updated year of it yet, but many are good at keeping that updated. So what you're going to do, usually the websites will report the middle 50%, right? The 75th to 25th percentile of scores reported. But it's going to be on the common data set, and that is in section C9, I think. I have my little notes here. I don't just know that off the top of my head, I promise. You want to look that up, and if you fit in that middle 50%, submit it, right? If you are meaningfully below, but your transcript is showing, no, I've got A's in math classes, I've got A's in my English and history courses, you probably want to skip it, right? We're going to talk about the what ifs, but generally that's a pretty good framework. However, you also want to read their policies, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. But what the common data set also shows is colleges can rank whether SAT, ACT, standardized testing is very important, considered, or not considered. So if you look at a school, and that's section C7, for those of you really taking notes, if it's falling in very important or important, you want to think about, okay, well, if you're just marginally below that 50%, it might be worth it to send it because they're looking at it. But let's look at some language now to help you get even more nuanced with your research. So these are 4 examples of highly selective colleges. Very different approaches, but I want to show you, and all these are very easy to find. They're in FAQs, they're on the financial aid websites. This is not hard to find. I love, kudos to Chicago for this one. Look at what they say about how explicit they are, because I had a family yesterday say to me, Tillie, well, the test optional isn't actually optional. Yes, it is, if they're stating that. Look, it says it has a no harm testing policy. So this is literally on their website. You do not need to worry about score cutoffs. You do not need to worry about anticipating these details. You can send in test scores with the confidence that they will not harm your application. They mean that. Truly optional. Caltech has a different approach. They don't even list, when AOs are reading it, they don't even see what the score is, right? So we're kind of removing that judgment. You're just in bucket A, B, or C, depending on where you fall, right? Tufts, really clear cut about what to submit, right? If you have a 1300 or a 28, submit that, right? Boom. Clear as day. And then there's Michigan, go blue. My mom went to Michigan, but this doesn't make me as happy, right? They're saying it's optional. Will I be disadvantaged? No, you won't be. But then if you look at the common data set, it indicates that testing is important. It indicates that it's recommended. So you would want to be a little bit nuanced and thoughtful about whether or not to send your scores to Michigan. Alrighty, next page here. We're rocking and rolling. So just in terms of a basic test prep and timing, right? 9th and 10th grade. 9th grade, you can do an optional PSAT practice, but 10th grade, there's the full PSAT. That's 11th grade. 10th grade, rather, you can do that optional PSAT. You're going to take, the practice one in 10th. But what we recommend, take that practice. You want to see how it feels to actually sit there and have to kind of slog through this thing. Gives you a good baseline. And then we recommend that you actually also take a practice ACT, which you can do for free quite easily now online, and see which one fits better. Only about 20% of students do marginally better on one or the other, but you might fall into that category, and then you can focus your energy on one or the other. The summer before 11th grade is really when you want to start your prep. Once you've completed Algebra 2, if you're ahead in that in terms of math, maybe a little bit earlier, but honestly, folks, the more English you've had, the more you're reading, the better that score will be. So you actually need to give your brain and knowledge source enough time to get the information that you need to do well on this. So this is just a sample of the kind of time you would spend working on it. But basically by October of 11th grade, and these should be offered in your school if you're domestic, you take the official PSAT, which then is the National Merit Qualifier. But we want you to take your official ACT or SAT usually by the end of 11th grade. If you're really on it, you're a really strong tester, you could take it for sure that first semester, but generally students are starting to think about it January through May of junior year. And then in 12th grade, you have that option over that summer to retest if you need to. I have students who are getting ready to do the June one after APs, some who are like, I'm going to plan for an August. That's great. You want to send scores only after checking self-reporting policies. And I just this is documented typically after 3 sittings, and we mean taking a test 3 official times, you're not going to see gains unless you're doing really, really intensive prep, right? Or you were really sick or something. But there's usually a tapering off after sitting for it 3 times. And folks, if you're doing it more than 3, it probably means you're spending too much time on testing, and there are other ways to really be using your time. Free resources include Khan Academy, which is through College Board for SAT. ACT partners with Kaplan. They have all kinds of free tests. And then 1600.io also has additional materials, lots available for free. Okay, and then last one on testing. Let's do that last piece here. So when do scores help even if they're below the middle 50%? Again, the nuance with all this. So your score, let's say you are at a school and you could know this from the school profile or the website for your own high school. They usually are reported on the school profile. You may have to ask your counselor, just as Tom and I were saying. If your high school has pretty low average scores and yours is much higher, so let's say there's a 20, the 20 is the average ACT, but you have a 28, submitting it could actually be quite helpful. Let's say even if the college is saying, well, a 29 or a 30 is our middle 50%, but yours is so much higher than your average, you could call attention to that even in additional info, but that's a good opportunity to think more thoughtfully about that. For my STEM folks, so we are seeing a trend right now that if you have a high math subscore, that can signal readiness if you're particularly going into very heavy STEM, engineering, CS programs that are highly competitive, even if your overall score is modest. So if you haven't done as well in the verbal as you were hoping, but that math subscore is stellar, you may want to submit the overall score. If the school has language like we were seeing at Michigan, right? Or they're saying it's highly recommended. Vanderbilt is like that. It signals a preference. It's saying we would really like to see it. So even if you're at a 26 and the range is 27 to 29, it's probably more helpful than harmful. And you can actually see on the common data set, like I was saying, the percentage of students that submitted testing. So you can actually see how many students are submitting it at any given school. And then for our homeschool or international students, or maybe we've had a lot of comments from folks who are at virtual schools, or you're doing some sort of not a typical curriculum. And there's many students doing that all over the world, and AOs are familiar. But if you are in one of those contexts, and if there's not a school profile, if you have a strong score, it gives more material for us to advocate for you in committee. So talking to your counselor, or even emailing an admission officer, right? Sometimes they'll be very straightforward with you about whether or not they recommend it, but look at all the data, and if it is strong and you're coming from one of those contexts, those scores can really help alleviate any concerns that the AO might have. Okay, rock and roll.
Finishing up one question.
I can vamp,
Well,
or I can do the slide.
Great. Andrew, got your question in there, baby. Okay, so what makes you stand out beyond your grades? So as we're wrapping up this session, again, this was a lot to help you understand how your grades and courses are going to be communicated, but with the rest of your application, what we want to note is that these are what we call these admission nutrients. There is a fifth one that we didn't put on here, which is called consistent engagement. But basically that just means that you've been involved in some type of activity, something outside of school for multiple years of your high school career, and you progressed, in that area. But these four areas, I'd say, are really wise things to communicate and showcase in your application through your qualitative side, right? The essays, anecdotes to share with your recommendation letter writers, the teachers that you've asked to write your recommendations, your counselor. Can you share with them some specific examples of intellectual curiosity where you dove in on a topic beyond what was just required on the reading list for your, English class, and you read all these books this summer because you love the subject of quantum mechanics? Those are great nerding out stories to share with colleges. They'd love to see beyond just strong grades in math and physics. Service to others. Did you start a, recycling program or drive in your school? Did you widen the expanse and the impact of it through your leadership and initiative and get your whole school district to get involved with meatless Mondays or something, to reduce consumption of meats, which have high fossil fuel rates, right? Let admission officers know about problems and causes that you've noticed in your area, that you've taken action steps to both serve your local community, but also lead initiatives and grow and expand your efforts beyond your high school walls, or if you're at a virtual school, beyond the internet, which beyond the internet is, who knows where that is. Collaboration, right? Can you share in your application stories where you've worked with people who are different than you, whether that's they have different academic gifts or leadership strengths, or maybe there are people who come from a very different worldview or life than you. Those are all ways to kind of help colleges be reassured that you're going to come in and be able to interact with difference and engage with it and not shy away from it, and not just be hanging out with the same type of people who have the same type of views or have the same type of strengths, because that's not going to get our world anywhere, right? So colleges want to see students who are really able to connect and really able to honor and recognize that, yes, I have strengths, I have an opinion on things, I have a life experience that I want to share willingly in these classrooms and in, these extracurriculars that I'm in college, but I also acknowledge that I'm not great at everything, or that other people might have a different viewpoint on me on something because of where they come from. And it's great to be able to know that, understand it, process it, and use that as a more informed way to to navigate whatever problem you're trying to solve. Okay, as we wrap up, I do want to reiterate some points that we've already made in the presentation, but one of the most strategic things that you can do to, if you're answering a question or having a question that you sent in, a lot of my answers were explain this in your additional info section, because that really is the go-to place in your college application, whether you're applying through the Common App or the QuestBridge application or a University of California application or whatever it may be. Apply Texas. There's a space in each of those application types to explain these types of extenuating circumstances. Family illness, my school burned down, so we had courses interrupted. We had to take them virtually. These things happen. You would be surprised the things that happen, all across the world when it comes to particularities, when it comes to why certain, students took certain courses and not others. But don't just write, here's the courses that I took and here's the grades I got. Use that additional information section to talk about, hey, I really wanted to explore my interest in healthcare, and my school had limited offerings. So I went to my community college and I took some prerequisite classes, and that really got me hooked on this idea. And then I did a project on it, right? That's the kind of information that colleges want to see that leadership and that initiative, and you going above and beyond what's available to you to make your learning happen. And there are many free and low cost options to make that happen for you. But just do also know that a college isn't necessarily expecting you to go and take every single course that your high school didn't offer. Again, they are evaluating you with that local context in mind. However, they're going to applaud and recognize and appreciate students who do go above and beyond with limit, right? If you already are taking 5, 6+ AP classes your senior year and you're like, well, I want to take more, but my school is limiting me, I'm going to go take them outside. I would consider that academic overloading, and you're not focusing as much on, you've already proven your academic readiness for these selective colleges. Consider that box check, that green light. You're an 80% academically admissible student to that college. But what are you going to do to communicate your course choices? Use it in your own words, or talk with your school counselor about your concerns, because they can contextualize that, those course choices more in their counselor letter. So that way there's something being documented from the school about, hey, the student took these courses, here's why they did this, versus question mark, nothing, not broaching the subject, having the admission officer have to guess or interpret. You can control the narrative here more than you think, and using these spaces and these opportunities, counselor letter, communicating with them what maybe they could share about your context, and writing it in your own words in your additional info section. Here's an example of what that might look like in an additional info section. Instead of just saying my grades dropped sophomore year, the admission officer would be like, okay, why? Did you just slack off? Or were you just not going to class? The right side example shows much more detailed circumstances that the admission officer may not know otherwise. So that's the kind of detail that you want to provide to help that person piece together that story. It's not necessarily going to make up for every single thing in your application, but it's the best chance that you can give to yourself to give yourself credit for your upward momentum and your movement and your future focus in college. This is basically just a wrap-up slide, taking away what we've already said, but yeah.
Yes. Well, and it's just to say, and we have just 2 minutes left here. But specificity is your superpower, folks. Give yourself the gift of really reflecting on this process. Think about who you are, how you want to tell your story. Remember the importance of rigors plus grades, helping you tell that story, but also the way that you are framing your essays, what you're including in additional information. So we hope it's been helpful, and Tom's just going to wrap it up, and then we'll see what we got.
Yes, we have a special offer for you, so don't leave, actually. If you can stay on for 5 more minutes. So as you may have noticed, Tillie and I have been hard at work trying to communicate to you all, the hundreds of you that are on this webinar, about some general best practices and tips, but it's really difficult for us to get to know your individual environment, your high school, the culture of the students there, what you're up against, what barriers you may be experiencing, challenges, questions you have with the college process. So at College Essay Guide, we want to try to make this as personal to you as possible. And there's 3 different ways that we kind of try to do this. Of course, we have a ton of free resources like these free webinars that we, keep hosting multiple times throughout the year about pressing hot topics. We have a family handbook for college admission that if you go to collegeessayguide.com/parents, it kind of summarizes a lot of these points and just the general, what should I be doing when it comes to college? It's one of our most comprehensive resources around that shares a lot of these tips that Tillie and I have shared in this webinar, but a lot more about demonstrated interest and about essay tips and all the things, right? We have pay what you can courses that we offer throughout mostly the summer and the fall for juniors and seniors. I'm teaching currently a course about highly selective colleges. It's actually a counselor course for counselors to be able to help their students, learn how to apply to those ranges of schools. But Ethan leads the course on how to write a personal statement. We have courses on supplemental essays. We have courses on how to make college affordable. So definitely check those out. Again, they do have a low cost relative to what you're getting out of it, and they're also pay what you can. So finances are a barrier. We want to make sure that that's not the case for you. And lastly, we offer individualized support for families. So we have individual college counseling, which is the whole picture, demonstrated interest, early decision or early application strategy. What extracurriculars should you be spending your time and diving more deep into to help cultivate these saplings you see on the top of this lovely slide into full-blown trees? So we offer that. We also offer exclusively just essay coaching if you want to really focus on the storytelling components of your application. You don't want to, maybe you don't need as much advice about standardized testing, course selection, where should you apply. You just have a list of schools and you're like, hey, I want to put the best application I can forward. We do have a separate service that is exclusively dedicated to essays. And then lastly, if you are a first-gen low-income student domestically here in the US, I'm actually just a low-income student. You don't need to be first generation for this program. We have an amazing program called the Match Ledger Scholars Program, which provides 10 hours of free individualized college counseling support to low-income applicants. And the great thing about the Match Ledger program is that it's not just for students with perfect grades, straight A's, 4.0s. It's also for students who have 3.0s who are kind of showing promise and potential. So don't sleep on it. If you are a low-income student and you are worried about applying to college, you're really overwhelmed by it, please consider applying for the program. It's amazing. The counselors who volunteer for it really want to help you put your best foot forward. And the best thing is that we have, for every paying student who does one-on-one essay and college counseling, we have an equal number of Match Ledger students that we support. So it is a one-for-one model, which really, really proud to represent because it's not too typical. I mentioned college counseling. That's something that both Tillie and I do as part of our jobs. It's a big part of our work, and it's what we love to do because having worked in college admissions, we know how stressful and convoluted and individualized this process can be. So we want to try to provide individual to support to as many families as we can. As we wrap up, and if there's any kind of like lingering questions, I did want to let you know, and Ray, if you wouldn't mind sharing this in the chat, there should be some language in the webinar doc for this. But we're currently offering $250 off our one-on-one essay packages, as well as our comprehensive college counseling packages. If you decide that that is something you want to invest in, it's a great chance to meet with folks like Tillie and myself and our wonderful team, Morgan, Scott, Renee, Adrian, other people, Jay, people that I'm missing, and get paired with a counselor who can really help understand your needs and create an action plan and game plan and be right there every step of the way for you.
Thank you, everybody. We try to get to as many questions as possible. Again, it's what tends to happen in some of these is we get really hyper-specific questions from you, which we encourage you to ask a counselor if you have access to one, because they're important questions. It can just be hard for us to have the context. But generally, thank you so much for being so engaged. We hope this was helpful. We have, as Tom mentioned, these free resources, all kinds of support. That's what we're here to do, is just make this a more clear and manageable process, because we know how much is wrapped up in it. I think that's that. Any last thoughts, Tom?
I'm just trying to scan through like lingering questions, and some people are asking kind of just general questions about, will you add the links in the chat? Just so you know, this webinar is recorded, and you're going to get an email follow-up typically in one business day. You get an email with the recording to this session. You get the transcripts coupon code and a link to book a call if you want to meet with one of our program advisors and talk about individual college counseling or essay coaching. And you'll also get some of the links and resources that we mentioned in this session that are relevant to the things that we talked about. So, and if we don't have the resource that you were thinking of or wanting, Google college essay guy plus whatever you want, and something will come up. I almost guarantee it. You can quote me on this.
Yeah.
We have over 500 blog guides on various topics about the college admission process that are hyper specific, supporting LGBTQ students, homeschool students, international applicants. Students, what if I don't have a school profile and have to make one myself? I'm a student and I'm international in this. I'm the first applicant for my high school. We have a guide about that. So check out our blog. It's really robust. There's often also YouTube videos, podcasts, and or all of the above related to all of these different topics. So we got a lot, and we can offer a lot to you if you hang out with us for a few more months in this wonderful joyride that you're on.
Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate it.
All right. Enjoy your evening, and thank you, Tillie and Ray, for being wonderful
Yeah. Thanks,
co-session
everyone.
joiners.
Good
Okay,
luck.
glasses off.
Ta-da! Bye, everybody.
Ta-da!